All right, let's look a little bit at inductive arguments and just give a little bit of, I'll just give a little bit of an introduction here to inductive reasoning and a few types of inductive argument that will probably pop up during our course this semester. These are some fairly common types of arguments, and so you're likely to see the author as we cover them, employ these types of reasoning in support of their positions. So let's take a little bit of a look at inductive reasoning. So first of all, when we talk about inductive arguments or inductive reasoning, we're talking about probabilistic reasoning. Okay, it's probabilistic. So that's the big distinction between deductive arguments and inductive arguments. Deductive arguments, they are when they have the proper form or correct form, a valid form, as we learned. The truth of the premises will guarantee the truth of the conclusion necessarily. In other words, it couldn't be any other way, right? It's a matter of necessity, a logical necessity. So again, in a deductive argument, when the argument has a valid form, in that technical sense of the term validity, then the truth of the premises are true, then the conclusion will necessarily be true as well. In inductive arguments, they are a matter of probability. So an inductive or a non-deductive argument, as I write here, is an argument in which the truth of the conclusion allegedly follows with a high degree of probability from the truth of the premises, right? So you can just think of about it as probabilities, right? As percentages. The higher over 50%, the stronger the argument. The lower over 50%, belief 50% probability, the weaker the argument. And of course, you can get really you can get really technical about that probabilistic by employing the probabilistic mathematics. We're going to do it in kind of more of a commonsensical way. So again, a weak inductive argument is like a fallacy. It means that even if the premises are true, the conclusion is still more likely than not to be false. And in a strong argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion is more likely than not to be true. So we're looking for cogent arguments, arguments that are both strong and have all true premises. So a cogent argument presupposes strength and then it just has true premises with it. So you could have you could have a strong argument that was uncogent because it contained a false premise. But if it was true, then it would make the conclusion more likely to be true than not. So basic categories for evaluating inductive arguments. Remember, we always have two questions to ask of any argument. Are the premises true, and does the conclusion follow from the truth of the premises, either with deductive validity or with probabilistic or inductive probability, inductive strength? So real quickly, we got two basic types of inductive argument that are going to pop up pretty regularly in everyday life and in philosophy as well. Inductive generalization and argument by analogy. So let's take a look at these two basic types of inductive reasoning. We've learned several formal fallacies and several formal valid forms of deductive argument, and here are two basic types of inductive argument: an inductive generalization and an argument by analogy. So an inductive generalization is a probabilistic generalization. The conclusion expresses a general conclusion, either all or most, right, of a class of things or people, right, versus from a sample size. So it reasons, an inductive generalization goes from a sample of some group or category, and then on the basis of the observations we make or properties that the sample has, we reason that all or most of that group or class have that property as well. So it moves from a sample of a category, has some property, thus it's likely that all or most of that group has that property. So for example, we surveyed 25%, pretty big percentage of the incoming freshman class at LSU, and and out of that 25% of the class that we sampled, 20% of them said that they were big football fans. So that's a pretty big percentage. So lots or most percentage of the class, incoming freshman class, are probably big football fans. Then on the other side here, we've got an argument by analogy. An argument in which it's based on a comparison or an analogy between two things, then on the basis of the properties that those two things share, we reason that the second one likely has this other feature that the first one also had. So here's the um, basic kind of format for this kind of argument. We have the first thing, A, has properties P, Q, R, and S. B also has properties P, Q, and R. Thus, it's likely to be the case that B also has property S. So an argument by analogy there. Here's an example, a better example probably, of a inductive generalization. So we got crate Y contains 100 pineapples. 3 randomly selected pineapples from crate Y are ripe. Thus, probably all the pineapples in that crate are ripe. Well, only it has 100, and we only selected 3. So that's not that's way less than a 10% threshold. Or it's only 3, so there's a big room, a large margin of error there. So we would want to say that that's an inductive generalization, but it's a weak one, right? The conclusion could still be easily false, um, even if those premises are true. Then we get an argument by analogy. So remember, what we're looking for is or strong arguments, not weak arguments. It can be an inductive generalization and still be fallacious. That would just be like a hasty generalization fallacy. So then we got an argument by analogy. Jane and Nancy, those are two things being compared, were both awarded National Merit Scholarships. Both were math majors and love mathematics. Both also appreciate Professor Smith's approach to teaching. Jane did extremely well in Smith's calculus class and received an A. Therefore, Nancy probably will receive an A as well. Argument by analogy. Based on the fact that these are relevant features would be connected to the conclusion, logically speaking, we'd think that that's got a strong argument by analogy. Again, the truth, given the truth of the premises, the truth of the conclusion is more likely to be true than not. When we're evaluating analogical reasoning or argument by analogies, we got to make sure that there's not a weak analogy fallacy. So we got to make sure that the similarity between A and B, the points of comparison, the properties that are being compared and analogized as a part of the argument, as the reasons for the argument, we got to make sure that those are relevant to the truth of the conclusion. A and B also can't be dissimilar in any relevant way to the truth of the conclusion. Otherwise, we would end up with a faulty or a weak analogy fallacy. And then just to wrap things up, let me mention quickly one other type of um, non-deductive reasoning called abductive reasoning. This is a type of non-deductive argument in which a theory is allegedly established as likely to be true because it provides the best explanation of some phenomena compared to the alternatives. This is also called reasoning to the best explanation. So we've got some phenomena, we've got something we know is a fact, it lacks an explanation for why it's a fact. If hypothesis H were true, then H would provide the best explanation of P, our phenomena, compared to its rivals, right? Thus, it's likely that H is true. So there we'd have to worry about how to compare and contrast the best explanation compared to these other rival theories. How do we evaluate that? And that'll depend on the content, the specific content of those fallacies. But we will see arguments by explanation used in several places in philosophy. We might see them being used in the philosophy of mind to give an account of the mind body problem. We might see them in moral philosophy dealing with moral disputes. What's the best explanation for moral disagreement? Is it anti realism about morality or is it realism about morality? We might see abductive reasoning pop up in dealing with conspiracy theories when it's alleged that a conspiracy theory is the best explanation of a certain historical or political event. So, again, these sorts of reasoning pop up in all sorts of areas in philosophy as well as other areas as well. So, when we're evaluating abductive arguments, you got to worry about a few different things. They need to be internally consistent. They have to cohere with other well-established facts and theories. And then oftentimes people will mention Occam's razor here, the more elegant, the simplest explanation with the fewest assumptions built into it is all things being equal more likely to be true than an alternative theory with more assumptions built into it. So some things to consider when evaluating abductive arguments there or arguments to the best explanation. And then again, just to wrap things up, when we talk about good and bad inductive arguments, again, what we're looking for are cogent arguments. So arguments fail, as we've learned through a few different lessons now, that if they have a false premise, or the premises, even if true, don't support the truth of the conclusion, either inductively validly or inductively strong, right? So again, deductively valid and inductively strong, then the argument will fail. So if it has either of those two errors, the argument has a problem with it and can't support the truth of the conclusion. So again, what we're looking for are cogent arguments. Once we know we got an inductive argument, we're worried about whether it's strong or weak. If it's a weak argument, then even if the premises are true, the conclusion is more likely to still be false. So that's what the same thing as a fallacy there, right? And so we'd have to toss the argument there. If it is a strong argument and all the premises are true, then we would think that the conclusion is more likely to be true than not. But if it's a strong argument, has at least one false premise, can't support the truth of the conclusion, so it's an uncogent argument, and the argument still fails. All right, so there's a little bit of a quick introduction to some of the basic types of inductive reasoning that we're going to be seeing throughout our semester here. Hope y'all have a good day and go study hard.